Welcome to episode 8 of FCLE Seminar, the Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto. The FCLE podcast is where we review American history and the Constitution to help you prepare for the Florida Civic Literacy Exam. Now, today we're going to take a look at another landmark Supreme Court case called Brown v. the Board of Education of Topeka in 1954. This is all based on the guide put together by the Florida Department of Education. I've got the links to that study stuff in the show notes, so check those out. And don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to our podcast at FCLE Seminar on YouTube. Got it? Sweet. Let's get started. Landmark Supreme Court case number 7, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. Case background. This case takes place in the 1950s. 1954 to be precise, and this case challenged the separate but equal doctrine established in the infamous, remember infamous means bad famous, Plessy versus Ferguson case that we discussed in episode 5. Let's break down the facts. The case of Brown versus the Board of Education was actually a consolidation of several separate cases from different states. These were all centered around the same issue of racial segregation in public schools. The plaintiffs in these cases argued that separate but equal facilities were inherently unequal and violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, in the lower courts, the plaintiffs were unfortunately denied relief because, based on the precedent set by Plessy versus Ferguson, remember, take a look at that one. That one set this whole stage of the separate but equal train car event. So think about it this way. In this case, the plaintiffs refused to give up. Thus, they appealed their cases to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's decision. See, the Supreme Court took on this monumental case, and in 1954, they delivered a groundbreaking decision. Chief Justice Earl Warren, in a unanimous opinion, declared that the separate educational facilities are, in fact, inherently unequal. This landmark ruling overturned the separate but equal doctrine and totally paved the way for the desegregation of public schools across the United States. The Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. This decision overturned that separate but equal doctrine established again in Plessy versus Ferguson. Now, there was support and resistance because of this decision, but ultimately, Brown versus the Board of Education is a landmark Supreme Court case because it was a catalyst for the civil rights movement. But, let's make some connections here. Like, what was the constitutional principle? We're looking at the 14th Amendment here. We are familiar with the 14th Amendment from Korematsu versus the United States and Plessy versus Ferguson, which I keep talking about in episode 5. The constitutional principle at the center of this Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education is the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Now remember, this clause states, quote, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." All right. I know you remember that from the last episode anyway. But see, in Brown versus Board of Education, it was argued that racial segregation in public schools violated the right to equal protection under the law. The Supreme Court agreed, ruling that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and therefore do indeed violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Yes! Finally, a win for the people. We have studied several infamous court cases, so It's really good to see the echo of positive change for the people. Yes, yes, for the people. Like old Abe Lincoln said, that this nation, under God, shall give a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. It's just amazing. It's amazing. Let's review. Here are the key takeaways in the landmark Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education. All right, takeaway number 1, the consolidation of cases. Brown versus the Board of Education was a consolidation of several cases from different states, which were all facing the nationwide struggle against segregation in public schools. Number 2, separate but equal doctrine. The lower courts upheld this segregation based on the separate but equal doctrine established in Plessy versus Ferguson. For more on that, re-listen to episode 5. Now, remember, this doctrine stated that racial segregation was legal as long as facilities for both races were equal. Number 3, violation of the Equal Protection Clause. The plaintiffs argued that segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This clause guarantees equal protection under the law for all citizens. We talked about the 14th Amendment in episodes 5, Plessy versus Ferguson, in episode 7, Korematsu versus the United States. Number 4, overturning Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court unanimously, that means in full agreement, ruled that the separate but equal doctrine was unconstitutional. The court determined that racial segregation in public schools was, in fact, inherently unequal and violated the Equal Protection Clause. In essence, Brown versus the Board of Education was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. It overturned the separate but equal doctrine and declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. Hey, thanks for listening. Join us again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can start studying for your test. The important thing is to start studying and start studying today. What are you waiting for? Like, subscribe, or leave your questions or comments for us at FCLE Seminar on YouTube, or hit me up on Spotify, Apple, or any of your favorite podcast players. This podcast is listener supported. Contributions can be made via the listener support link on Spotify, or you can buy me a coffee via the link in the show notes. This is your host, Mercedes Musto. Join me again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can pass the FCLE.